In the post-war period, Japan was the expert in the art of imitation, or nicking someone else's design and selling it as their own. But although some started as a cheap knockoff, by studying the original relentlessly and fixing its weaknesses, what started as an inferior copy soon became better than the original. The first Nissan Patrol was clearly a version of the American Willys Jeep, but while that vehicle helped invent the blueprint for a modern off-roader, the Patrol would spend 3/4 of a century proving just how far that blueprint could be pushed. Through hard work, listening to customers and attention to detail, over 7 generations, Nissan created a legend. We're very lucky today to have a special guest to help me tell the Patrol story, Ken Lee. Ken's been a lifelong Patrol fan, and that shaped his desire to style cars, of which he's done many. One of his latest creations is the 2024 Nissan Patrol, so he's uniquely qualified to talk about its history. Why is the Patrol the toast of Australia and the Middle East? And why did customers have to import the Japanese-built Patrol back into Japan just to drive one? This is the Nissan Patrol story. Before we get started, if you want to watch these videos without adverts and you pay for a Spotify account, you can watch them using my new Spotify video podcast account. If you're interested, click on the link above or in the description. Japan after the war was a country of scarcity. There was little money or raw materials, so most people used a bicycle or, if they were lucky, a motorbike to get around. The devastation and lack of money meant roads have fallen into disrepair or were little more than dirt tracks. To keep going, some in Japan needed a vehicle that could go anywhere and keep going when everything else had given up. It might seem incredible today, but 1940s Japan was worried about American cars killing their car industry. American vehicles, and particularly military surplus Jeeps, had made their way into Japan. The government put out a tender for a new off-road vehicle for the police force. This wasn't just about pride, this was about independence. Relying on imported vehicles wasn't sustainable long-term, and developing a homegrown solution was both a practical and a symbolic goal. Without money to employ a team of stylists, Nissan essentially copied the Willys Jeep design. Underneath it had a rugged ladder frame chassis that used a 3.7-litre Nissan bus engine and a 4-speed manual. That large engine meant it could haul double the load of the Willys Jeep. It was utilitarian, and so inside it was sparse. One odd element was the seats. The passenger seat was actually larger than the driver's. It was heavy, and that didn't help handling. The engine delivered only 91 horsepower, but despite all of this, it could conquer the worst terrain. The year it launched, the Patrol became the first vehicle to get to the 6th of 10 stations on Japan's iconic and very tall Mount Fuji. This made the public sit up and take notice of Nissan's automotive prowess. And getting the public interested was critical. The Patrol lost out for the government's police contract to the Mitsubishi Jeep, really a rebrand of the Willys Jeep produced in Japan under license. Public support was desperately needed to recoup the development budget and for Nissan to stay solvent. Mitsubishi weren't the only company bidding for the police force contract. Toyota also made a Jeep-like vehicle that launched the same year as the Patrol, and it became a significant competitor. Produced to order, it was sold to the United States Army to help the Korean War effort. Later versions would get a name that you may have heard of, the Toyota Land Cruiser. The Patrol got small changes throughout its life. The engine became more powerful, the windscreen became a single pane of glass, and this utilitarian vehicle got some luxury bling with chrome on the grille. And despite losing the police contract, Nissan started selling the Patrol to the police and the fire services. In 1959, it got a new 4-litre P-Series engine delivering 124 horsepower. It was exported to countries like Australia that appreciated a good value off-roader, but also to the Middle East and South America. If the first generation looked like a Willys Jeep, then Nissan surely drew inspiration for the second generation from the Land Rover. It retained the ladder frame chassis, leaf springs and P-Series engine, this time with a 3-speed manual, although it would eventually get a 4-speed with synchromesh. There was the option of a short or long wheelbase version, but at this stage only a canvas roof. In Japan, this vehicle became very common to see as a fire truck, using four-wheel drive in the hills, and in the cities only using two-wheel drive. Some of these vehicles weren't replaced until the early 2000s. Patrol sales began in Africa and expanded to North America in 1962, sold with the help of cowboy actor Roy Rogers, but without his trusty horse Trigger, who wouldn't fit in the passenger seat. Nissan used the Datsun brand in North America, but not with the Patrol. It was sold as a Nissan, the first vehicle to be given that name, although it would use the Datsun name in some parts of the world, such as Australia, where the Patrol showed its prowess, becoming the first motor vehicle to cross the grueling Simpson Desert. Sales began to take off because it wasn't just governments and military who wanted this type of vehicle. With the growth of civilian car ownership, some wanted and some really needed a vehicle that could go anywhere, particularly if they lived in the wilderness. It became a favourite with Australian farmers, miners and adventurers. It made short work of the Middle East's unforgiving terrain, especially when searching for new oil reserves. A vast remote landscape opened up with the advent of a vehicle that could tame it. In 1969, the Patrol was assembled in India as the Jonga, a vehicle for the Indian Army. But one area where the Patrol faltered was North America. It seems Roy Rogers didn't work his magic. Sales ended in 1969 despite growing demand for Datsun's passenger cars. And that was what was occupying Nissan during the disco decade, passenger cars. The Patrol was a niche vehicle and it hardly changed. Same 4-litre P-Series engine, same look. It would get small changes like a hardtop, but while the world moved on, the Patrol stayed the same. By the late 70s, it looked seriously old. So as British Leyland updated the ageing Mini in 1980 with the Metro, Nissan used the extra money that had poured in to finance a new third-generation Patrol that launched in 1980. It had been updated to challenge the new modern Willys Jeep, the 1974 Cherokee, with modern 1980s straight lines. It could also take the fight to arch-rival Toyota with their new Hilux. Inside, it was a step up from the Land Rover, with optional power steering and air conditioning. Ken Lee had a hand in styling the 2010 Patrol and led the design of the 7th generation in 2024. When he was a kid, he was fascinated by the Patrol, and in particular, the 3rd generation model.
In that generation, the decals and the unique paint schemes were really were quite wild. At the time, you have a red body color with yellow stripes on the body side. So that was quite common in the back in the 80s. To have the paint graphics, not only on Patrol but on a lot of the off-road vehicles. So that was certainly a trend back then. So even at that time, when people buy these vehicles, you can feel that there is a longing for a sense of style. It's just how people express it has evolved over the decades. So I think that kind of bold graphic treatment is super inspiring because as a young child in the 80s, what I always remember and felt about Japanese cars is always the graphics.
Underneath it was still a ladder frame with leaf springs. There was a choice of 3 engines, the by now pretty old 21-year-old 4-litre P-Series engine, a 2.8-litre plus a new 2.4-litre and 3.2-litre diesel, both a response to the changing times that required fuel efficiency with off-roading prowess. The 4-speed manual was joined with a 3-speed automatic for long wheelbase vehicles. The Patrol would eventually get a 5-speed manual and a turbo diesel. Along with the new design, there was a new name. In Japan at least, it would be known as the Nissan Safari. In the rest of the world, it was still the Patrol, and that included a new market that Nissan made a big play for, Europe. The conditions there weren't quite so harsh, so less expensive light-duty models were offered. The Patrol was produced in Spain from 1983 and became a popular sight. By 1988, it had snagged half of the Spanish SUV market. It showed its capabilities in the 1987 Paris-Dakar Rally, and the Patrol became the first diesel-powered car to finish in the top 10 of this grueling event. No rest for the wicked. Strong Japanese competition came along to spoil the Patrol's party. The first was the 1981 Isuzu Bighorn, the car that would become the Trooper. Mitsubishi launched the Pajero in 1982, and in 1984 there was a long overdue update to the Toyota Land Cruiser. It took 20 years to update the last Patrol, but not so with the fourth generation that arrived in just 7 years. In the 1980s, Japanese businesses could do no wrong, and cheap credit flowed into the country, allowing Nissan to spend. The new Patrol might look similar to the previous model, but underneath it was quite a different story. Leaf springs gave way to coils, delivering a superior ride on the highway. Up front, there was a 3-link live axle setup with 5 links at the back. This wasn't Nissan's only off-roading SUV though, there was also the Pathfinder, but the Patrol was the most capable. There were more amenities inside: central locking, electric windows and mirrors, carpeting throughout, power steering was now standard, a 7-speaker sound system and alloy wheels showed that this was more than just a rough and ready vehicle from the 1950s, it even got leather and wood trim. It was larger as well. Whilst that made it nicer inside, it created a problem in its native Japan as it put the car in a higher road tax bracket. The fact that Nissan made their car less competitive at home showed the importance of the export market. Sales might be down in Japan, but the Patrol was customised into a hearse as the rather amusingly titled Nissan Safari Adieu.
Adieu, adieu, to you and you and you.
By the 1980s, the Australian car industry was inefficient, protected by 60% tariffs. The government forced through rules to rationalise it, forcing consolidation. The most obvious effect of this was a spate of badge engineering, and it meant the Nissan Patrol was also sold as the Ford Maverick. This was a win-win for both companies. Ford got a much-needed go-anywhere off-roader to compete with the Toyota Land Cruiser. Nissan got access to Ford's well-established regional and rural dealership network. The Nissan Patrol could be serviced now in the middle of nowhere, useful for a vehicle that was commonly found in the middle of nowhere. It would lead to sharing other models like the Ford Falcon XF Utility, which was sold as the Nissan Ute, and this is also why the Nissan Pintara was offered as the Ford Corsair. When Nissan launched the 4th generation Patrol in 1987, they were riding high. Not so with the 5th generation 10 years later. Japan's economy had stalled, there was no cheap credit and their finances were looking grim. So the update was an exercise in cost saving, using the same chassis and suspension with modifications to accommodate a larger body, heavier load and wider track. With the market for luxury on-road SUVs exploding, the focus was on comfort, safety and refinement. It started with the powertrains. There were new 4.5 litre and 4.8 litre 6-cylinder petrol engines, giving the Patrol plenty of torque across the rev range. The new 3-litre turbo diesel had reliability problems early on, but would eventually redeem itself. The luxury included higher quality materials, full leather upholstery, a sunroof and satellite navigation in case you got lost in the wilderness. This found it a growing Middle Eastern fan base, and the 4.8 litre, in some cases tuned to over 2,000 horsepower, would become popular for desert racing. Whilst Nissan might not have the money to do major updates, this ended up counting in its favour. The existing platform had been refined, tweaked and changed for many years, and by this point the Go Anywhere Patrol was bulletproof. So as Australian sales continued, the extreme abuse Aussies subjected it to was shrugged off with quiet confidence. It became a vehicle of choice for the United Nations coping in remote and hostile regions. Some call the 1997 Patrol the peak of the vehicle's traditional design philosophy. No wonder then it was produced until 2024, long after it had been replaced by newer models. The Nissan Patrol had been produced because Japan needed a go-anywhere off-roader, but while the new model was selling well in Bolivia, Morocco, Nepal, Pakistan, Paraguay, the Philippines, South Africa and Sri Lanka, it wasn't doing so well back home. After just over 50 years in 2005, the Patrol, or the Safari as it was called, stopped being sold in Japan. The next generation launched in 2010. By this time, Nissan was a very different company. They'd survived the financial problems of the late 90s and with Renault's help were trying to become the best at everything. Want a BMW killer? Well, try an Infiniti luxury car. Want the cheapest car in America? How about the Versa? Nissan was competing in the hottest market of the early 2000s, crossovers with some of the best value cars like the Qashqai and the Rogue. and they were braving new territory with a mass-market EV, the Nissan Leaf. So the new Patrol had to follow in the footsteps of those cars, crafted to take more of the market, and Ken Lee would have a hand in doing just that.
And then the big leap came in the early 2010s. So that's when the Y62 version came out. And that one, I believe at the time, Nissan actually took a big risk to really bring the Patrol upmarket and more premium, but of course, retaining the fundamentals of what makes it tough and go anywhere. And so it got a bit more upscale, refined, and it's almost, to many of our customers, it feels like a luxury vehicle. But at the same time, the design is not a design that screams, look at me, I've made it. It's a very honest design that is still quite simple, but with just enough refinement and maybe a touch of elegance and something to make it aspirational.
Whilst many owners still took the Patrol off-road, there was a significant group who took it to the shops or on the school run and wanted on-road comfort.
So when I visited the UAE and visit places like the Dubai Mall or see these opulent 5-star hotels, it's interesting to see that in the valet parking area, you would see Lamborghini, Bentley, and then Patrol. So in that sense, I got kind of a taste of what the vehicle means to the customer. And then, okay, they go to the 5-star hotel, and one day, and the next day they go jumping sand dunes out in the desert.
People bought the Patrol because it was this tough go-anywhere off-roader, and they wanted to be associated with that brand, so it needed to remain a tough go-anywhere off-roader that also worked well on-road. That's a tough line to walk.
Eventually, as it evolved, it started to have multiple versions with different front bumpers. And there's a city version, and then there's an off-road version. Now, the off-road gives it an additional amount of approach angle, and it's even further more capable off-road. And the city version is also, of course, it has to remain capable as well, so it doesn't lose that aspect.
The live axles gave way to an optional system, shocks combined with hydraulic cylinders that reduced body roll and evened out sudden bumps while still allowing large wheel travel. There were four-wheel drive tricks similar to the Range Rover, like hill start assist and hill descent control. The new Patrol was 28 centimeters longer, 15 centimeters wider and taller, and there was no longer a short wheelbase version. The Middle East was now the Patrol's primary market, so it's no surprise that the new model launched in Abu Dhabi. It took 3 years for the updated Patrol to appear in Australia, but when it did, it also proved to be a hit. The engine list was much simplified, and being aimed at petro-states, they focused on power and not fuel economy. There was a 4-litre V6 and a 5.6-litre V8, still with the option of a manual, although that would be phased out in 2016. There wouldn't be a diesel or, heaven forbid, a hybrid. There were two-wheel drive versions that focused on on-road comfort and four-wheel drive models that could brave harsher terrain. The new Patrol made its way back to the USA in 2010 for the first time since 1969 as the luxury Infiniti QX56. 6 years later, Nissan rebadged the Patrol as the Armada, sailing to America to conquer the off-road market, hopefully with more success than the 16th century Spanish Armada. The Patrol was manufactured in Japan, but it wasn't available there due to its massive size. That didn't stop some enterprising folk re-importing it to get around the restrictions. This produced the comically silly situation that a Patrol had to be exported out of Japan, sit on a dock, then put back on the boat, back to Japan for Japanese owners to drive it on Japanese roads, maybe driving past the factory where it had been manufactured in the first place. The 7th generation Patrol launched in 2024, again in Abu Dhabi, and again it would take 2 years to arrive in Australia. This time, Ken Lee oversaw the styling, and it was a challenge to get it right.
It's built up its reputation as something, as a really dependable, reliable, durable vehicle. I think that's the first and foremost, and why it has such a strong following in many of our markets, particularly the Middle East and Australia and in many parts of the world. As you probably hear, any type of iconic enthusiast vehicle whenever you do a new one, the customers, the loyal customers will say, don't change anything. We like it just the way it is. So that's actually a great challenge for us because I'm thinking, well, you say that you love it and you don't want us to change it, but the competitive landscape changes, every year. And we have to advance. We have to change it. When we interview the customers, they tell us they really pay attention to is the sense of consistency throughout the vehicle. And there's attention to detail. It shows there are human designers, not AI, is working on it with a fine eye and a relentless strive to make it perfect. And I would say that sentiment kind of echoes throughout the product development team, not only the designers, but obviously with the engineers, throughout the generations of patrols and Nissan in general, that Japanese sense of craftsmanship and never give up until it's perfect. And we always talk about we need to create a face that looks healthy and it looks strong and it looks confident. The headlamps are the eyes, represents a certain gesture or a certain feeling. We have always had this traditional Nissan, what we call V-motion grille. So it's not just a box, it's the shape of a V to give it some dynamism. So with the latest version, we took the architectural inspiration and instead of chrome, we made the V-shaped pillars on the grille. Their body color, their positive shape, like the columns and pillars of architecture. So they give a sense of strength and it is styling, but at the same time, at a glance, it gives the impression of the vehicle. It communicates that it's strong underneath. And something we want to hold on to from the heritage of Nissans is the D pillar, which kicks up and has a diagonal gesture. And that's something that's been around in Nissan heritage for a while, as far back as I can remember. In the 70s, the Kenmare Skyline had it, and there were some others, the S10 Silvia. And then moving into modern times, every generation of the Nissan Murano had it, and a few others. And in a boxy vehicle like a Patrol, if all the graphics and lines are perpendicular and linear, it would be a bit static and boring, and ultimately it is still a dynamic, a moving vehicle. So we want to give it just enough hint of motion. So things like this, where a big gesture of the window graphics or the V motion in the front grille, some of these areas are what we do to give it, some uniqueness and some dynamism in a boxy vehicle. In the past, to convey luxury, you add more and more chrome to it, and actually in the latest version, we dial back the chrome, but we focus on lighting, which gives a sense of premiumness through the use of technology. So a lot of effort has been put into the LED signature lighting with a very unique, iconic shape. In the latest one, we evolved the lighting signature from the last several generations. We've had the C-shaped signatures in the lighting. So customers already recognize it, and we thought since they recognize it and they call it the C-shaped signature, okay, let's make it double and give them two C shapes. It looks quite impressive. You have, when the turn signals come on, you have two C-shaped elements lighting up, very recognizable. There's no other vehicle like it. And also one interesting aspect that's maybe quite unique to Patrol is the majority of our sales, because it's sold in regions with hot climates and they're usually white. So in a white vehicle, the graphics is everything. The position of the lamps, the grille, you see the negative to positive space. That's the first thing you see.
The team making the new Patrol would also give a little nod to the vehicle that started it all.
When we're designing this interior, which is itself the new Patrol quite luxurious and premium, and there's a place on the vertical portion of the center console and the horizontal portion where they join together, there's tiny little seam. And in the design team's strive for perfection, we thought we cannot just have a seam in an arbitrary place. So that's when the idea from one of the team members thought, let's put a little tag there. And then we start brainstorming, what do we say on the tag? So then we thought, since 1951, clearly, we pay homage to the original Patrol.
Ken produced a very striking design, and so it's no surprise that Nissan found a way for the Patrol to return to Japanese showrooms in 2027 as Nissan's flagship model. As for engines, Nissan offered two, a 3.8 litre and 3.5 litre turbo V6, producing up to 495 horsepower. That's more than 5 times the power of the original Patrol engine, and that had a larger displacement. It was controlled by a 9-speed automatic, no manual this time, but then with modern day automatics on a car like this, is a manual really necessary? Despite being body-on-frame construction, with improved suspension it felt more like a unibody SUV, and some reviewers said it drove better on-road than the latest Land Cruiser. But off-road, with no centre diff lock and less wheel travel, it was outclassed by the Range Rover, Defender or the Land Cruiser. But that didn't mean it couldn't take on severe terrain. Lower the tyres' air pressure and it'll play nicely with sand dunes, and with the built-in air compressor you can pump the tyres back up for the drive back home into town. And it could still be used in the Australian bush. In 1962, as I mentioned earlier, the Sprigg family with their kids became the first to cross the Simpson Desert in a vehicle with their Nissan Patrol. 60 years later, the now 67-year-old Doug Sprigg made that same journey in a second-generation Nissan Patrol, and the modern-day Patrol tagged along behind as a support vehicle. So, what's next? Well, when it comes to the shape and style, Ken has given us some hints.
So that's something we are going to continue to play off of, to not forget the heritage and look back at what people love about the vehicles and, of course, play that up. So in case of the Patrol, how do we make the design communicate more of that toughness and go anywhere, but retaining the aspirational and premium aspects of it? So we simply need to do more of the same. But then at the same time, as the market evolves and as more and more technology comes into the vehicle, then the debate of how much digital, how much analog, that's an ongoing topic that we discuss deeply. So what we need to do the most is give the vehicles character. And, in some brands, there's a certain very fixed design language, and you do a small version of that, a medium version, a bigger version. But Nissan is a very appealing company for car designers because we don't do that. We have so many high character and iconic nameplates, and we definitely have fun with each one of them.
The Patrol started off as a copy of the Willys Jeep, and a rather good one at that. It's changed with the times, but one thing has stayed the same: Nissan's commitment to making this a go-anywhere off-roader. Yes, it's gone up market, but car companies need to stay in business, and that's what the public demands. There isn't a big demand for bare-bones off-roaders. The Patrol has simply changed with the times, improving on the rugged qualities of the original car.
I think simply the vehicle has not let the customer down. It's brought them to different places. It's always been with generations of customers who have throughout generations of their families been buying Patrols. So it's built up a following. But at the same time, as word of mouth spreads, we get new customers, we get younger customers, and it's always been the cool product.
If you want to see the whole interview with Ken, there's a link on the right. There's also a video to another very rugged vehicle, the Toyota Hilux. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.